Okay, we'll continue talking about this today. In the last class, we started this topic, this lecture on how to write a good technical report or a research paper. And what we've done so far is basically we discussed about what are the different sections we may have in the paper. We may have abstract, introduction, related work, proposed work, experimental results, analysis, design, etc., conclusion and future work, acknowledgement and references. Now we were talking about how do we write these sections, and we talked about that in introduction we should try to let me turn it off. Okay, we should try to answer the following questions: what problem we are solving, and why this is an important problem, how this is a challenging problem. We can have 1 to 2 paragraphs for this. We can use phrases like this, and I also provided a few examples from previous papers, previous articles. How what kind of a statement we can write in answering these 3 questions. Then additional questions in introduction would be, what are the existing solutions? Briefly, we can tell about what has been done and what not. What are the weaknesses of existing solutions? And we have to be short here and to the point. There are some examples. There are some phrases you can use like this. And I also provided a few examples of some of the text from previous articles that you can do it like this. Okay. The next thing in the introduction would be what is the core idea? What is your core idea and solution? And we have to be explicit in stating the key idea behind our solution. And so we can use phrases like the core idea behind our method is this and this, or the novelty of the proposed method lies in this and this, and so on. Or our method is different from this and this in the following 2 aspects, 1 and 2. I also provided a few examples of that, and that's where we were in the last class. Okay, so now next thing in introduction would be next paragraph would be briefly summarize the main contribution of your work. Okay, this could be in a 1 paragraph or a few bullets. So you can use phrases like our main or key contribution in this paper or in this report or in this work are as follows: 1, 2, 3, and so on. You can put numberings or bullets. Or to the best of our knowledge, this is the first work or first paper which presents this. Okay. Or to the best of our knowledge, we are the first to propose this. So these kind of statements, they are strong statements, but if you are sure about what you have done, and if you're sure about that you are the first one to do that, why don't we make those statements? Okay, so but we have to make it with a clause that to the best of our knowledge, as far as we know that we are the first one to do this. However, in order to write this to the best of our knowledge, you have to do a comprehensive literature survey, that you really need to find out whether anybody has done it or not. Okay, so it should not be a false claim. Otherwise, readers of your paper or report would immediately identify that you are making false claims. Okay. All right. So some examples of this summary paragraph of the main contribution is, it could be like this. That is coming from one of my recent paper in 2019, and it was a system, watch me from distance, WMD, a privacy preserving long distance video surveillance system. And so we try to write it like this: the main contribution of this article is a system called this that has the following distinct characteristics. So if you, let's say if in your work, in your capstone project, you are proposing a system or an application which has different distinct characteristics, you can actually mention it like that. That main contribution of your work is a mobile application called this, which has the following distinct characteristics. And then you mention those characteristics. What are the different features of your application, and those features should be novel and distinct. Okay. Another example could be this, that let's say if you made two contributions and you can then number them. The main contribution of the paper is twofold, 1 and 2. Okay, that is coming from a paper from 2016. All right, so this could be basically examples to summarize the main contribution of your work. All right, then at the end of introduction section, you need to basically provide a paragraph which describes the organization of your report or your paper. If let's say your report is 15-page report, okay, and then introduction is let's say ending at page number 2, you need to provide you need to tell readers that okay, that is going to be the structure of the rest of the report. I'm going to have these many chapters or these many sections, and in these sections these things are described, so that at the end of introduction, readers would have an overall overview and idea of the rest of the report. Okay, so it's an important paragraph. You can use phrase like the rest of the paper or report is organized as follows. Section 2 or chapter 2 describe this. In section 3 we present this. In section 4 it describes experimental testing and results, etc., and so on. Okay, so here's one example coming from a paper in 2015, and this example is like the rest of the article is organized as follows. In section 2 we discuss this. In section 3 presents overview. In section 4 we describe this. Okay, and so on. Okay, so that ends your introduction. Okay, so if I take you back to the report which I was talking about, your capstone project report. Okay, and if you look at introduction section here, in introduction section what I actually suggested you to write the answer of these questions. What problem you're solving, why this is an important problem, how this is challenging problem. You can use around 100 to 200 words for that. Other general guideline is that any evidence or any arguments you make, it should include statistics and background information. Should be cited from credible sources. Here is an example of citing. Here is an example of multiple references citing. You can use that, and make sure anytime you make a claim, that claim is supported by clear evidence. Okay. Then rest of the questions in introduction would be question number 4 and 5. What has been done to solve this problem, and why existing solutions are not sufficient, and what are the key weaknesses and limitations. And then next paragraph would be what is your key idea or core idea and solution. What are the key characteristics of the proposed solution, how your solution is novel and better than existing solutions. So that can come in 100 words or so here in this paragraph, or maybe 150 words is also fine. Okay. Then finally you need to summarize the key contributions in bullets. You need to be explicit in writing what are the key contributions in your work. Don't make the reader guess about that. Reader would be understanding, would be trying to find what are the key contributions. You have to be explicit by yourself. If you are unable to write this, that means you don't know what are your contributions. Okay, you have to be explicit and clear in writing what your system does and why the reader should care about it. Okay. At the end, describe the structure of the report. So that is about introduction section. Okay, then coming back to okay, coming back to the next section, related work. Okay, related work, background, preliminaries, all these things you can write here. Okay, okay. So in related work, we discuss related work, all the work which has been done to solve this problem or which are somehow related with our work. We need to explain the novelty and distinctiveness of the proposed work against existing work, uh, and if we can provide a tabular comparison like this, that would be great. Tabular comparison means you can summarize all the related work in a table. Here in the first column of the table, you can mention author's name and at L. At L means there are multiple authors, okay? And this is the last name of the first author. Senior at L, senior is the last name of the first author, where are more authors are more than 2. And then you provide the reference number. Okay, here you mention multiple aspects by which you are comparing these works. For example, in this case, implicit channels, multiple cameras were used or not, whether sensitive information was attached or not, or and so on. And then you can say yes or no, or you can also put some values or some text for this. So that would basically provide a clear idea to the readers how proposed work is different and novel compared to existing work. Okay. Another example of uh, comparing works is like this, and that you can actually provide in related work table, related work section or related work chapter. That is how your proposed work is different from existing work. Okay, so that helps in establishing novelty and distinctiveness of the work compared to existing literature. So a few things which we should consider in writing related work is past work which you describe should not be discussed one by one. Okay, rather they should be linked with each other. For example, you can mention it like this: while author at L and provide the reference number, the method proposed by them is advantageous from the perspective of this. It suffers from the following problems. Okay, it suffers from this problem, which was later addressed by Chen et al. So here you are making a link between these two works. That you're saying that first work has some advantage, but it also has some weaknesses, and those weaknesses were overcome by another work. So that's how you need to link those works. You need to do a proper synthesis of the literature and try to link these works so that it makes better sense. Well, other option could be that you describe one work in one paragraph, which is not elegant, which is not good. That means you don't know how these works are related to each other. Okay. When you are describing multiple works, it is important also to make add or what I can say, you make a flow of this is like this. For example, in this paragraph you see that we're talking about memory forensics is an evolving and promising area of research, and in this direction. Now if there are two authors in an article, you need to mention the last name of those two authors and then provide the reference. If there are more than two authors, then you need to provide the name of the first author, that is the last name of the first author, and at L. And there's a dot after L. You should note that. Okay. If there is only single author, then you provide the last name of the single author and then reference number. So what I'm talking, what I was mentioning here, that you are linking these works in some way. Zhu and Wang presented a technique for this and this. In addition, the Grajnio et al. Demonstrated a set of approaches this. Then subsequently after this, this work came. Further, this work came. Interestingly, this was also related with this somehow. So somehow you need to make a linkage. Okay. All right. Now, sometimes it may happen that although it may not be kind of applicable in your project, however, when we are continuously working on problems and presenting our works and publishing our work, so those works could be related. I could cite my own related work in my current report, and the related work could be past work. So if it is so, then I have to clearly differentiate the novelty of the current work with respect to my own past work. Okay, if I'm citing my own past work, so that distinction need to be made. Otherwise, readers would not be sure that you are. So first question would be: you have already done this. Why? How this work is different from your previous work? So we have to be very clear about it. Okay. Although this is in the context of research papers, sometimes we publish at conferences, and that work is extended and then submitted to a journal paper. So that is a usual practice in research community, that a conference paper is followed by a journal paper, and that is on the same problem, same topic. In that case, we generally should have around 35 to 40% new content, and that is mostly in the proposed method and result analysis. So we have to add more angles, more dimensions to the proposed method, and then we also need to do more experiments, comprehensive results we need to provide, and analysis, etc. So there should be around 35 to 40% extra content from a conference paper to a journal paper. Okay. How do we cite this? How do we mention this, that this is an extension of the previous work? So this is an example here. What it says, that to the best of our knowledge, the idea of using a feedback camera to observe human monitoring behavior for determining the importance of camera views in a CCTV surveillance system was introduced by Atri et al. So this is my own paper, and I'm citing my own previous paper, that this idea was introduced in this work, which was a previous work. Now this work, that means the current paper, is an extension of this previous paper in the following ways. Okay, now you need to mention how this work is different or how it is extended from the previous work. So we have to be very explicit about it. Okay. Another example is as follows. Sometimes we can mention it like this: in this article we propose they did this, and then put a footnote here, and the footnote says the earlier version of this work with preliminary results were published in this. So that means now we are referring to our previous work. In the previous work, we are saying that was earlier version, and in that version we had only preliminary results. So that means this work is more comprehensive. Okay, so this is then another example of that. The rule is that we should not copy even a single sentence from our past work. Rather, we should rewrite it. Otherwise, it will be considered as a self-plagiarism. Okay, so that is what is usual practice. All right, then next we move to proposed work chapter. Before that, let me also go to our background and related work, what I ask you to do. So in your capstone project report, you need to summarize your prior related work. You should have a reasonable number of quality citations in this section. You should identify gaps and limitations in prior work, particularly gaps that your system addresses. Specifically, make sure to mention limitations that make existing solutions not useful for the problems mentioned in the abstract or introduction, and then try to organize and classify similar examples into there's one question by password to the milestone counts in that definition. No, the answer is no, uh, because this work is considered is the work which you are doing in the semester. So at the end of the semester, what you come up with your one consolidated work. So those milestones you can still use those as a part of this major work. Okay, so uh, if let's say you would have done uh, you would have done some other project in the previous classes in the previous semesters, and now you are using from that project into this project, that will fall in this category, that you had your own previous work earlier. Now you need to show that how this work is different from your previous work which you did in some other course in the past semesters. Okay, or let's say if you're doing even in this semester another course and that work is somehow related with this work, so you have to be very clear how this work is different from that work, and if there's any overlap, how much is that overlap, and whether that overlap is minor or it is significant. Okay, all right. Again, the past work should not be discussed one by one, rather they should be linked with each other and summarize the novelty and distinctiveness of the proposed work against the existing work explicitly in a table illustrating different aspects. And the length of this section would be around 500 to 800 words. Okay. All right. Now coming back to proposed work section. Now in proposed work section, most of you are working on a system or an application. So let me also add application here, system or okay, application. But sometimes, not sometimes, actually in research, we usually work on methods. We develop a method, or we develop a framework, or we develop an algorithm. So that also could be an option. So we have to be clear what we are doing. Are we proposing a method? So then we should call this we present this method. Okay. Are we proposing a system? System means that something which is really working, which has different challenges of scalability, efficiency, accuracy, and all those kind of things. Application is something which anybody would be able to use it for certain specific purposes. Framework is a set of like a set of steps which you perform to do certain task, and in framework there could be black boxes, and you can tune those black boxes according to the instantiation of framework to a particular problem. Okay, algorithm is like systematic step-by-step solution of a problem, and which would also require analysis of complexity, time complexity, space complexity, etc., and number of operations are performed and so on. Okay, so I assume that in this course most of you are working on system or application, but then you need to describe your proposed work in detail. And what details you should provide? You should provide system architecture, data flow diagrams, use case diagrams, and you should also try to make it formal and scientific. by using scientific mathematical tools and notations. Okay, you should use figures, block diagrams, flow charts, algorithms uh, to describe your work. Uh, One thing which is important here is you should differentiate between preliminaries and your novel contribution. Sometimes when we describe our proposed method, we also need to describe a few things which are part of our method, but they have already been done. So some existing tools, existing blocks will be using. So we have to be very clear in establishing or mentioning that what are the preliminaries. That means that this is like which is required for our work, but which is not our novel contribution. Okay, these are the existing works or existing methods or existing tools which we are using for our work, but that's not our novel contribution. So we have to make it clear that what is new and what is preliminaries. Uh, General guideline is that we should present arguments for the choices we make. Okay, so sometimes uh, there could be different design choices or different algorithmic choices or different choices which you are making, that okay, you want to do this, but actually in order to do this there were different options as well. You could have done this, you could have done that, but there are some limitations with those options, or there are some disadvantages with those options, so therefore you chose this option. Okay, so those kind of arguments should be provided, rather than just saying that we use this because I mean that is available to us. No, but you should also explore what were the different other options to use and why you chose this option over the other options. Okay. We also need to list out any assumptions we make. Sometimes when we're describing a work, okay, we are saying that okay, this is we assume that for this system or for this application, uh, let's say our let's say if you're developing a mobile app which is communicating with a backend server, so assumption could be that we assume that the communication channel between this mobile app and the backend server is encrypted and secure. So that means we don't need to care about that. That is that communication channel is secure. So that assumption can be made. Okay. Uh, so there are some assumptions which need to be made explicit. However, there are some assumptions which you don't need to make. They're obvious. You don't need to state them. For example, if you are using a mobile app, you should not mention like a person who will be using this app will be having 5 fingers and 2 hands and so on. So that is kind of obvious. So that assumption should not be listed. Okay. Here is one example of making assumptions explicit. Here in this case, this is coming from a paper of 2015. Our framework is based on the assumption that assumption 1, assumption 2, assumption 3, assumption 4. So we are making 4 assumptions here. Okay. It is always good to cross-reference those assumptions. Let's say you made an assumption, and now you made an assumption in proposed work, and now you are going to refer that in experiments. Because of this assumption, we relax this kind of situation or condition. Okay, suppose. So in that case, it is good to have those. Good to number these assumptions. So let's say assumption A1, A2, A3, A4, and later you can refer them that as per assumption A1, we consider that in this experiment we are doing this. Okay, so those cross referencing can also be done. In that case, you should number these assumptions. Okay. Right. So then coming back to report and what I ask you to do in a proposed system and application this thing. Well, this is like something which would be quite different from for every student. Okay. However, there are some general things which are required for this project is system requirements. Anything we are developing system or application, there are some requirements because you are working with a sponsor and you need to ask a sponsor what are the requirements of the solution which you are proposing, what it should do, what it should not do, and what are the operating requirements and so on. So this section is important. Technical design is important. In technical design, of course, you can provide these use case diagram, system architecture, data flow diagram, etc. But just make sure that just don't put diagrams. You need to describe those diagrams in text. Okay, and that is why I asked you to that this is section or this chapter would be around these many words, 1000 to 1500. So you need to describe those diagrams in text and refer those. Okay, and these are the general guidelines which I already explained on slide. Okay, next thing we are going to discuss is writing experimental section. And I think since we are running out of time, we will stop in a few minutes and then we'll continue in the next class. So in experiments, it's always good to first of all analyze what is the objective of experiments, why we are doing it, what we want to experiment. Okay, and there are a few examples here that list, let's say, two experiments, 5.1, 5.2. In 5.1, we are determining appropriate video switching time, and this is a user study based experiment. And here we are explicitly starting with the main objective of this experiment is to find appropriate video switching time for the proposed system. Okay, objective should be listed. For the second experiment, system testing for surveillance accuracy and timeliness, the purpose of this experiment is to, so again we are listing the objective and also describing a little more details what participants were supposed to do and so on, which could well be the case for you as well. If you're developing a mobile app, you may be asking different users to use that map and see what is the usability of that app, how easy it is to use the app, and not only that, but also whether it is able to perform certain functions or not, and how timely you can perform those functions, what is the how accurately you can do that, what is the accuracy and what is the timeliness, efficiency. Okay, another example of this is the experiment is designed with the following two objectives. So you list down the objectives of the experiments. Okay, all right, then this slide, and then we'll move to the we'll end this class and we'll continue this with the next class. Okay, so here we need to describe the experimental setup, what machine was used, or in your case, if you're developing a mobile app, what mobile device was used, what was the environment of experiment. Did you do it in lab? Well, you will not be doing it in lab because of this outbreak situation. You would be doing it remotely. So, but whether it was a synthetic experiment, like you were running it on just computer and observing it using some program, or you were having some sort of a start and a stop clock kind of a thing, or how you were doing it, or you were having a recorder or camera or something by which you were recording activities of users, how they are using this particular application or system. Okay, one example of writing of this is here the effectiveness of the proposed framework is evaluated through a user study based experiment, and user study you could be doing in your case as well. Okay, in this experiment, users were asked to play the role of an adversary, and they were asked to answer a set of questions and so on. Okay, so the environmental basically the environment in which you are doing this experiment should be explicitly mentioned. Experimental setup should be explicitly mentioned. Okay, all right, now I think we'll stop here and we'll complete rest of it in the next class. I will then stop recording now.